The morning air bit through Jake Morrison's coat like a blade as he guided his horse along the ridge above Devil's Canyon. December 1882 in the New Mexico Territory didn't forgive weakness. At 42, with 20 years of cavalry service behind him, Jake had learned to read trouble in the landscape before it found him. What he saw in the canyon below made his blood freeze. 6 bodies sprawled around an overturned supply wagon, dark stains spreading across the white snow like spilled ink. The wagon's torn canvas flapped in the wind, and the silence felt wrong. Too complete, too final. "Easy, Ranger," Jake murmured to his gelding, feeling the animal's tension. Horses smelled death before men could see it. Jake had ridden out before dawn to check his winter trap lines. Instead, he'd stumbled onto a massacre that would change everything. He descended the steep slope with practiced caution, his hand resting on the Colt 45 at his hip. The Winchester rifle across his saddle provided cold comfort against whatever had done this. The scene told a story written in blood and bullet holes. The wagon had been traveling north toward the mining camps, probably carrying supplies or payroll, but the bodies lay wrong, too scattered, too far apart for a simple ambush. Jake dismounted and studied the frozen ground with a scout's trained eye. Boot prints mixed with moccasin tracks, the distinctive hoof prints of unshod horses, and spent cartridge cases that glinted like copper coins in the snow. "Comancheros," he said aloud, his breath forming white clouds in the bitter air. He'd fought these half-breed raiders during the Apache Wars, Spanish and Indian mixed bloods who sold whiskey and weapons to hostile tribes, then raided settlements when profit called. Unpredictable and without honor, they were the worst kind of enemy. But something felt wrong about the body count. The wagon could carry 8 passengers, yet Jake found only 6 corpses. 2 people were missing. A faint sound from inside the overturned wagon made him draw his weapon. Wounded enemies could be more dangerous than healthy ones. Another lesson learned in blood during his cavalry years. Jake yanked aside the torn canvas and found her. A young woman lay crumpled against grain sacks, her dark hair matted with blood, clothes torn and stained. But her right hand clutched a skinning knife with a red blade, and beside her sprawled a dead Comanchero with his throat open to the bone. This wasn't just a survivor. This was a warrior. Her eyes opened as Jake holstered his Colt. Dark eyes, almost black, with the hardness that came from seeing too much death too young. She couldn't have been more than 25, but those eyes belonged to someone much older. "The fighting's over," Jake said, keeping his voice steady and low. She struggled to sit up, grimacing from a bullet wound in her shoulder. The bleeding had slowed, but infection could still kill her if he didn't act fast. "Who are you?" she whispered. "Jake Morrison. I've got a ranch 5 miles north." He studied her face. High cheekbones, copper skin, features that tugged at buried memories. "You need medical attention." Her eyes narrowed with sudden recognition. "You know who I am." Something about her jawline, the way she held herself even when wounded, triggered Jake's memory like a hammer blow. Those features belonged to a dead friend. "Santos," he said quietly. "You're Carlos Santos's daughter." Her grip tightened on the bloody knife. "Maria Santos. If you know that name, you know I don't need charity." Jake felt old ghosts settling on his shoulders. Carlos Santos, gunrunner, smuggler, and during the Apache Wars, one of the most reliable allies the cavalry ever found. A man who'd saved Jake's life twice and died with a traitor's bullet in his back. "Your father was a good man," Jake said. "Died too young." "Murder," Maria corrected, her voice sharp as broken glass. "By men who called him friend." Jake nodded grimly. He'd heard the rumors about Carlos's death, betrayal from within his own organization, the kind of treachery that left bitter tastes and unpaid debts. "Can you ride?" "I can do whatever survival requires." "Then we move now. Those Comancheros will return to verify their work. They find you breathing, They'll finish what they started. Maria forced herself upright, accepting Jake's help, but never releasing the knife. She was taller than expected, with the lean strength of someone raised hard. Everything about her radiated controlled violence. "Why should I trust you?" she asked. Jake met her stare without flinching. "Because your father saved my life at Canyon de Shelly. Because I don't abandon soldiers." "I'm no soldier." "No," Jake agreed, glancing at the dead Comanchero. "You're something more dangerous. You're a survivor who knows how to kill." As they moved toward his horse, Maria spoke again. "They weren't after supplies." "Figured as much. What did they really want?" Maria's laugh held no warmth. "Information about something my father left behind." Jake felt trouble gathering like storm clouds. "What kind of information?" "The kind that gets people buried in unmarked graves." She offered nothing more as Jake helped her onto Ranger. But as they rode away from the blood-stained snow, Jake couldn't shake the certainty that he'd just stepped into something far larger than a simple rescue. Behind them, wind scattered fresh snowfall over the massacre site. But Jake knew this wouldn't end here. Men like the Comancheros didn't surrender easy prey. And whatever Carlos Santos had hidden away, it was valuable enough to justify mass murder. That made it valuable enough to die defending. Jake's ranch sat in a natural fortress between two ridges, positioned where a man could spot approaching trouble from three directions. The fourth led to a box canyon with walls too steep for mounted pursuit, perfect for making a final stand. 20 years of fighting Apaches had taught Jake to think like a tactician. When he'd purchased this land after mustering out, he'd chosen defensibility over beauty. Now helping Maria down from his horse, Jake was grateful for that foresight. The ranch house was built like a frontier fort, thick adobe walls, narrow windows positioned for crossfire, stone foundation that would stop rifle bullets. Everything designed to keep enemies outside and defenders alive. Inside, Spartan functionality ruled. A massive stone fireplace dominated one wall, flanked by gun racks holding Jake's collection of military weapons. A heavy oak table occupied the room's center, scarred from years of hard use. No decoration, no comfort, just tools for survival. Jake settled Maria in the room's single comfortable chair and gathered medical supplies. Cavalry training included field surgery, crude techniques for keeping wounded soldiers functional until real doctors took over. "This will hurt," he warned, cutting away her blood-stained shirt to examine the wound. "Everything hurts," she replied, voice steady despite obvious pain. The bullet had punched cleanly through her shoulder, missing bone and major vessels. "Lucky." Jake cleaned the entry and exit wounds with whiskey, then wrapped them with clean linen strips. "You've done this before," Maria observed, watching Jake work with professional efficiency. "War teaches harsh lessons, most of them painful." As Jake finished the bandaging, Maria studied the cabin with calculating eyes. She noted the gun racks, the strategic furniture placement, the thick walls designed to withstand siege. This wasn't just a ranch house, it was a military position. "You're expecting trouble," she said. "Always. Keeps me breathing." "Smart philosophy." She paused. "My father believed the same thing." Jake stepped back to examine his work. "Speaking of your father, what did he hide that's worth mass murder?" Maria's expression turned granite hard. $50,000 in gold coins. Jake whistled softly. "That's serious money. Southern Pacific Railroad payroll money. My father intercepted it during a shipment to the California mines. Called it taxation on territorial expansion." A thin smile crossed her lips. "The railroad company placed a substantial bounty on his head, made him extremely careful about concealment locations. And you know where he hid it?" "Part of it." Maria reached inside her shirt and withdrew a folded paper. "My father divided the treasure map into 3 sections. I possess one piece. 2 of his most trusted lieutenants held the others." "Held?" Both dead, executed 3 months ago by the same man who murdered my father. Her voice turned deadly quiet. A man called Black Pete Caldwell. Jake knew the name well. Peter Caldwell, former Confederate cavalry officer turned outlaw chief. A man without honor or conscience. The kind who'd murder his own family for profit. So Caldwell possesses 2/3 of the map, Jake said. Correct. But without my section, the other pieces are worthless. The gold is hidden in a location that changes with seasonal flooding. You need all 3 pieces to locate it successfully. Explains why the Comancheros wanted you alive. Maria nodded grimly. Caldwell hired them for capture, not killing. He needs information only I can provide, specific landmarks that shift with weather patterns. Jake poured coffee and offered Maria a cup. She accepted gratefully, wrapping her hands around the warm tin. How long before they come? Jake asked. Not long. When his men fail to return, Caldwell will investigate personally. He commands perhaps a dozen riders, all experienced killers with military backgrounds. Jake moved to the window and studied the snow-covered landscape. Heavy flakes were falling again, which would cover tracks, but also trap them in place. We need to even the odds considerably, he said. We? Maria raised an eyebrow. Jake turned back to face her. Your father saved my life twice during the Apache campaigns. That creates obligations. Carlos Santos is dead. You owe nothing to dead men. I owe it to myself, Jake said firmly. I don't abandon people when I can prevent it, and I absolutely don't hand women over to animals like Caldwell. Maria studied Jake's weathered face carefully. You're either remarkably brave or remarkably foolish. Probably both. Despite everything, she almost smiled. My father would have appreciated you. Your father did appreciate me. That's why we're having this conversation instead of planning your funeral. Over the following hours, Jake outlined his defensive strategy. The ranch house could be fortified effectively. Furniture repositioned to block windows, shooting ports cut in strategic walls, supplies moved to protected positions. But Jake wasn't planning merely to defend. Caldwell expects to find a helpless woman and an unprepared rancher, Jake explained while cleaning his Winchester. He's not expecting a prepared military position, defended by someone with extensive combat experience. What about escape? Maria asked. We could attempt to outrun them. Jake shook his head decisively. In this snow, they'd track us down within hours. Better to make our stand here, where we control the terrain. To prove his point, Jake led Maria to a storage room behind the kitchen. Inside were ammunition crates, spare weapons, and something that widened Maria's eyes in surprise. Dynamite. Owned a mining claim in the mountains briefly, Jake explained. Didn't prove profitable, but I retained some equipment. You're planning to blow them to pieces? I'm planning to utilize every advantage available. Jake's expression turned grim. Caldwell's men are experienced, but they're accustomed to fighting civilians and unprepared targets. They've never faced someone who spent 5 years fighting Apaches. Maria watched Jake methodically check his weapons. The Colt .45 on his hip, a backup revolver in a shoulder holster, the Winchester rifle, and a sawed-off shotgun for close-quarters work. This wasn't just a rancher. This was a professional soldier. There's something else you should know, Maria said quietly. Jake looked up from loading cartridges. What? One of Caldwell's men served under you, Tom Bradley. My father mentioned him, said he was dishonorably discharged for theft. Caldwell hired him as chief scout. Jake's hands stopped moving. Tom Bradley? Sergeant Tom Bradley from the 5th Cavalry? The same one. Jake felt ice forming in his chest. Tom Bradley. They'd served together for 3 years during the Indian Wars. Jake had saved Tom's life at Antietam, and Tom had returned the favor during an Apache ambush near the Gila River. Now Tom rode with murderers, hunting innocent women for blood money. That complicates things significantly, Jake said quietly. How so? Tom knows my tactics, understands how I think. He'll be able to advise Caldwell about what to expect from me. Maria watched Jake's face carefully. Does that change your decision about helping me? Jake met her eyes. No, it just means I'll have to be considerably smarter than I originally planned. As darkness settled over the canyon, Jake completed his preparations. He repositioned furniture to create defensive positions, cut shooting ports and window shutters, and placed loaded weapons at strategic locations throughout the house. Maria, despite her injury, proved invaluable. She moved quietly and efficiently, asking no unnecessary questions and wasting no motion. Her father had trained her well for this kind of work. Can you shoot accurately? Jake asked, handing her a spare Colt revolver. Maria accepted the weapon and checked the cylinder with practiced ease. My father insisted I learn, said women in this territory needed to protect themselves from predators. Excellent, because tomorrow morning, you'll have the opportunity to demonstrate that training. Outside, wind howled through the canyon and snow continued falling steadily. But inside the cabin, two people prepared for war with the quiet efficiency of veteran soldiers. They were outnumbered 8-1. They were trapped in a box canyon with no escape route, and they were about to face some of the most dangerous outlaws in the territory. But they possessed something Caldwell's men wouldn't expect: thorough preparation, extensive combat experience, and the desperate courage of people with nothing left to lose except their lives and honor. As Jake made a final inspection of their defenses, Maria spoke into the darkness. My father used to say that a man's true character is revealed not in victory, but in how he confronts impossible odds. Jake nodded slowly. Your father possessed great wisdom. He also said the best way to face impossible odds is to ensure they're not as impossible as your enemies believe. Jake smiled grimly as he performed one last check of his rifle. Your father was an exceptionally wise man. Death came riding with the dawn. Jake had been awake since before first light, positioned at the front window where he commanded a clear view of the approach to his ranch. Maria waited at the rear window, her wounded shoulder bound tightly but her shooting hand rock steady. They materialized from the gray morning mist like phantoms. 8 riders spread in a loose skirmish line, advancing with the confidence of predators who expected easy prey. But Jake could see the calculation in their movement. These weren't drunk cowboys or desperate amateurs. These were professional killers who understood their deadly trade. At the center of the line sat a man Jake recognized from wanted posters throughout the territory, Black Pete Caldwell, tall and lean as a gallows pole, with iron gray hair and the cold eyes of a born killer. Beside him rode a familiar figure that made Jake's throat tighten with old anger and fresh betrayal. Tom Bradley looked older, harder than Jake remembered. The clean-shaven young sergeant had become a bearded desperado with dead eyes and a killer's slouch. But Jake would have recognized that profile anywhere. They'd shared too many campfires and too many battles for time to erase the memory. Caldwell raised his hand, and the riders halted approximately 50 yards from the cabin. Close enough for conversation, far enough to avoid immediate rifle fire. Morrison! Caldwell's voice carried easily across the still morning air. We know you're in there with the Sanus woman. We have no quarrel with you. Hand over the girl, and we'll ride away peaceful. Jake stepped into view at the window, his Winchester visible but not yet aimed. The lady is under my protection, Caldwell. Take your business elsewhere. Caldwell's laugh sounded like breaking glass in the morning silence. Protection? From what? We're just here to collect what belongs to us. The girl's father stole from us. We're here to settle the debt. Carlos Santos never stole from anybody who didn't deserve it, Jake called back. And his daughter's obligations are her own business. Perhaps we should discuss this more reasonably, Caldwell said, his voice taking on a false friendliness. Tom, why don't you explain the situation to your old army friend? Tom Bradley guided his horse forward, stopping just outside effective rifle range. "Hello, Jake. It's been too long." "Not nearly long enough, apparently." "No need for this to turn ugly, Jake. We just want the girl. You hand her over, and Mr. Caldwell's prepared to offer you $5,000 for your cooperation." Jake felt the familiar cold anger settling over him like armor, the same deadly calm he'd experienced before every major battle during the war. "I don't sell women, Tom. Thought you knew me better than that." "Times change, Jake. A man has to adapt to survive. A man has to look at himself in the mirror every morning." Jake's voice carried the weight of absolute moral certainty. "I won't hand over an innocent woman to murderers. Not today. Not ever." From the back window, Maria's voice rang out clear and strong, despite her injury. "Caldwell, you want to discuss debts? Let's talk about what you owe for murdering my father." Caldwell's face darkened with rage. "Your father died because he forgot his place in the natural order. Same mistake you're making right now, girl. My father died because you're a coward who shoots men in the back." Maria's voice blazed with fury. "If you want me, come take me yourself." Jake saw Caldwell's hand drift toward his gun and knew the talking was finished. "Get down," he shouted to Maria as he brought his Winchester to his shoulder. The peaceful morning exploded into violence. Jake's first shot punched one of Caldwell's men from his saddle before the outlaws could react. His second shot wounded another, sending the man tumbling to the ground clutching a shattered shoulder. The outlaws scattered like startled quail, seeking cover behind rocks and trees. But Jake had chosen his defensive position with a soldier's eye. From the cabin windows, he and Maria commanded clear fields of fire across the open ground. Maria's Colt barked from the rear window, and Jake heard a man scream in pain. Despite her wound, her aim remained true. For 15 minutes, the battle raged across the snow-covered landscape. Bullets shattered window frames and punched holes in the cabin's thick adobe walls. But Jake's fortress held firm. He moved from window to window like a phantom, keeping the outlaws pinned down while Maria covered approaches they couldn't see. But Jake knew they were only buying time. Caldwell's men were experienced fighters, and eventually they'd find a way to close the distance. When that happened, the battle would become a matter of ammunition and nerves. That's when Jake played his ace. He slipped out the cabin's rear door while Maria provided covering fire, carrying a stick of dynamite with a short fuse. Moving low and fast through the snow, he worked his way around to the left flank, where 3 of Caldwell's men had taken cover behind a fallen pine. The explosion sent all 3 men flying through the air like broken dolls, creating a crater that would be visible from the next valley. The shock wave rattled every window in the cabin and spooked horses throughout the canyon. "Jesus Christ," one of the surviving outlaws shouted in terror. "What in hell was that?" Jake didn't give them time to recover their wits. He was already moving back toward the cabin, but Tom Bradley stepped out from behind a boulder to block his path. "Hello again, Jake." They stood 20 feet apart in the falling snow, 2 old soldiers who'd shared campfires and battles and were now facing each other across drawn guns. "Didn't have to be this way, Tom." "Yes, it did." Tom's voice was flat, emotionless as Winterstone. "You always were too stubborn for your own good. Remember what you told me at Antietam Creek? Sometimes a man has to choose between what's right and what's smart." "I remember. Well, I finally learned the difference between them." Tom's finger tightened on his trigger. "Smart keeps you alive, and right lets you sleep at night." Jake moved as he spoke, diving left and rolling behind a snow-covered log. Tom's shot passed through empty air, and Jake came up with his Colt ready. They fired simultaneously, muzzle flashes bright in the gray morning. Tom's bullet burned a line across Jake's ribs, tearing through coat and shirt. Jake's bullet took Tom's center mass, spinning him around and dropping him face first into the crimson-stained snow. Jake approached his former comrade slowly, weapon ready. Tom was still alive, but barely. Blood frothed on his lips as he struggled to speak. "Jake, I'm sorry. I know, Tom. I know you are." Tom Bradley died with snowflakes melting on his face and old regrets in his fading eyes. But the battle wasn't finished. Gunfire erupted from the cabin's vicinity, and Jake ran toward the sound. He arrived to find the most remarkable sight of his life. Maria Santos stood in the cabin's doorway like an avenging angel, her Colt smoking in her steady hand. At her feet lay Black Pete Caldwell, a neat bullet hole between his cold eyes. "He tried to rush the back door while you were occupied with your friend," Maria explained, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. "I was waiting for him," but Maria wasn't finished. Her dark eyes blazed with years of suppressed fury as she looked down at Caldwell's corpse. "This is for my father, you backstabbing snake," she said quietly. "Carlos Santos sends his regards from hell." Jake looked around at the carnage scattered across his peaceful valley. 8 men had ridden in that morning full of murderous confidence. Now 6 lay dead in the bloody snow, and the remaining 2 had fled on foot, their horses scattered by the dynamite blast. "It's finished," Jake said. "No," Maria replied, still staring at Caldwell's lifeless face. "Now it's truly finished." They spent the remainder of the morning burying the dead and cleaning up the battlefield. Jake spoke brief words over Tom Bradley's grave, remembering the young sergeant who'd saved his life rather than the broken man who'd tried to end it. That afternoon, as they sat beside the fire in the warm cabin, Maria pulled out her piece of the treasure map. $50,000 in gold, she said quietly, studying the aged paper. Enough to purchase a completely new life somewhere far from all this death and betrayal. "What will you do with it?" Jake asked. Maria was silent for a long moment, staring into the dancing flames. When she finally spoke, her voice was thoughtful and measured. "My father is dead. His enemies are dead. His debts are paid in full. Maybe it's time to stop living in the past and start building something new." She held out the map piece toward Jake. "Carlos Santos owed you a debt for saving his life during the war. Consider this payment in full, with interest." Jake looked at the paper, then gently pushed it back toward her. "I don't want your father's gold, Maria." "Then what do you want?" Jake met her eyes steadily. "I want to know if you have anywhere else to go." For the first time since he'd found her in that blood-soaked wagon, Maria Santos smiled genuinely. "I was hoping you'd ask that question. Ranch life is hard work," Jake warned. "Long days, cold winters, not much company except horses and cattle." "Sounds absolutely perfect. And there's always the possibility that more trouble will come looking for us eventually." "There's always that possibility anywhere in this territory." Maria's smile widened. "Besides, I've grown accustomed to having someone competent watching my back. And I've gotten used to having reliable help with the daily chores." "What about the gold?" Maria asked, folding the map carefully. Jake considered this seriously. "We'll use some of it to expand the ranch. Buy more cattle, improve the buildings, maybe hire some honest hands. The rest will hide away for emergencies." "And the other 2 pieces of the map?" "Caldwell's saddlebags are probably full of interesting papers. We'll burn anything that might bring more trouble." Outside, snow continued to fall gently on the graves of dead outlaws in the first day of an unlikely but promising partnership. Jake Morrison had ridden out that morning to check his trap lines. Instead, he'd found something infinitely more valuable. Someone who understood that some principles were worth fighting for, and some fights were worth winning regardless of the cost. As the sun set behind the snow-capped mountains, Jake and Maria began planning for spring. There would be cattle to purchase and tend, fences to build and mend, and a ranch to expand into something substantial. It wouldn't be easy work, but then again, nothing worthwhile ever was. 6 months later, the Morrison Santos Ranch had become one of the most prosperous spreads in the territory. Jake handled the livestock and business dealings, while Maria managed the books and dealt with suppliers. They made an effective team, two people who'd lost everything and found something new worth keeping. The gold remained hidden in a place known only to them, insurance against future troubles that might come riding over the horizon. They lived quietly, worked hard, and built something solid together. Neighbors assumed they were married, and neither corrected the assumption. In all the ways that mattered, they were partners bound by something stronger than law or ceremony, mutual respect forged in blood and fire. On quiet evenings, they would sit on the porch Jake had built, watching the sun set over their land. Sometimes Maria would tell stories about her father in the old days. Sometimes Jake would share memories from his cavalry years. Mostly, they simply enjoyed the peace they'd earned through struggle. Justice had been served completely. Honor had been preserved intact. Two people who'd lost everything had found something new and precious worth protecting with their lives. In the end, that partnership proved more valuable than all the gold hidden in the mountains. It was worth more than anything money could buy.